of Pompeii. They began to search for clues that previous experts might have missed. And they widened their investigation beyond what the bones alone could tell them. They were startled by how many indications of syphilis they came up with.
There's various strands of evidence from written sources, from the cultural functioning of the city, from the business of prostitutes, from public houses, from the fact that it was a trading center in the seaport, and evidence that we can see on bones are all coming together to support the hypothesis of the presence of syphilis in the classical antiquity of Europe.
But the Henneberg's work has done more than just demonstrate that the disease has been around in Europe for thousands of years. By incorporating the bone evidence into the wider social context of the times, they have shed light on the broader questions about the transfer of the disease. They have begun to produce a picture of daily life that illustrates the environment in which syphilis can flourish. Syphilis, like other bacteria, is a survivor. It mutates and adapts to changing conditions. It has not always been a killer. Epidemiological research shows that in rural societies like that of the Taino Indians in the Dominican Republic, syphilis existed in a much milder form that was not sexually transmitted. Here, it was not the devastating disease seen in Hull and Metaponto. Mary Lucas Powell studies the evolution of the bacteria and how it has been transmitted amongst the American Indian communities.
Well, in the pre-Columbian New World, in the southeastern United States, there was ample opportunity because of styles of clothing, of styles of communal sharing of eating and drinking utensils, of sleeping places. There was abundant opportunities in every generation for these diseases to be transmitted without any sort of sexual contact involved. And therefore, they were much more common within the populations, but with no connection with sexual activity.
All the syphilis bacteria needed to spread was skin-to-skin contact. And since the need for clothing in such a warm climate was small, there was much opportunity for transmission. The disease caused an ugly skin condition that most people caught in early childhood, but it rarely developed into anything more serious. And everyone who contracted this mild form of the disease also developed an immunity to the more dangerous venereal form. But then what was it that made the disease so deadly in other places? What caused it to mutate into a sexually transmitted killer? A look at the places in Europe where syphilis had been found may provide an explanation. Naples, Hull, Metaponto, and Pompeii all had one important common trait. They were all port cities with well-established shipping industries.
Well, ports are ports. People always behave badly in ports. It seems that Hamburg is a good example at the moment, Rotterdam, Amsterdam. They're all ports. They all have very large red light districts. And if you're an all-male crew cooped up on a ship, then you would expect a certain amount of recreational activity to occur and a certain amount of sexual activity to occur. And there will always be prostitution.
But promiscuity wasn't enough to warrant the transformation, because the rural Taino culture also allowed for premarital sex. Yet the Tainos only contracted the mild version of the disease. The difference, as the archaeologists in Hull discovered, was the cosmopolitan nature of the European ports.
Venereal syphilis is primarily a disease of cities, of advanced civilizations with advanced health measures and medications.
Civilization, it seems, was what allowed the syphilis bacteria to transform. Better hygiene, the wearing of clothes, and less sharing of eating and drinking utensils meant the milder form of the bacteria was unlikely to propagate. Only the more dangerous mutations that developed other ways to spread managed to survive. The people buried within the Augustinian friary walls in Hull were the sophisticated urban elite of medieval society. Among such civilized people, the mild form of the disease was not likely to be present. But if the more dangerous strain existed in the vibrant port town, sexual interaction would have caused it to spread. So the truth about the syphilis enigma is finally beginning to unfold. Where climate and behavior had permitted, it seems to have thrived as a mild skin disease. But when conditions changed and urbanization expanded, it was the more deadly strain that raised its ugly head. What was once blamed on the American Indians can now be seen for what it most likely was, a worldwide menace that has plagued populations on both sides of the Atlantic for thousands of years. The knowledge is historically revealing, but it is also crucial to the way we look at diseases today.
Obviously, there are still controversies surrounding the origins of syphilis and its history and its development, but what we are doing in studying syphilis in ancient populations in the Mediterranean is not just of historical significance. We believe that understanding how a human population could learn to live with a chronic sexually transmitted disease can be very useful for the present-day situation.
The intriguing thing, I think, about the syphilis-type organism is that it seems to be extraordinarily adaptable. It can adjust to many different types of environmental situations. It can adjust to many different types of host-immune responses. It can adjust to many different types of transmission of the disease and do quite well in all of these situations.
There are always new strains emerging, and if we now use penicillin, or we use penicillin for the last half century to combat syphilis, doesn't mean that it was eradicated. Actually, new strains arise right now that are resistant, and we'll have to contend with them.
With the constant advances in medical technology, scientists and doctors will continue to search for ways to destroy this and other diseases. But the story of syphilis is also a lesson in societal stigmas and cultural accusations. For more than 500 years, blame for syphilis was passed off almost as fast as the disease itself could spread.
It's always been called the disease of those bad people over there. The French called it the Neapolitan disease. The Germans called it the French disease. And we see this with AIDS today. AIDS was blamed when it first appeared and was recognized as a new disease. It was blamed on Haitians, it was blamed on Africans, it was blamed on other groups of people. Disenfranchised people, by the way. Blamed by people in political power, by countries with political power, blamed on people in countries without equal political power. So there are political consequences to this sort of identification of origins of a particular disease. Saying that American Indians gave venereal syphilis to the world is the same sort of useless blaming using a term, venereal syphilis, that has very loaded political and moral connotations, and it's actually a misdiagnosis.
And there is a final twist in the tale. For the American Indians, tainted all these years by the accusation that they had given syphilis to the world, history had decreed an even crueler fate. When the Native Americans first encountered Columbus and his crew, they were almost wiped out by the diseases the Europeans carried with them from the Old World. They survived, barely. But with the loss of so many people, they also lost their collective immunity to the dangerous venereal form of syphilis. Where once they were protected by the milder skin condition, they were now just as vulnerable as the Europeans had always been. And when, in subsequent centuries, the venereal strain made its way to the New World, the results were catastrophic.